There you go. We always receive this message. So first of all, thank you so much for everyone to jump in and to be present here in this webinar. For some of you, it's good morning. Others, it's good afternoon. Others, good evening. So it's always difficult to find here a great schedule for everybody around the world to participate. Reason why we are recording this session for those that cannot attend, specifically in the Asian and the Pacific. So I'm here giving a brief introduction to this webinar, also on behalf of my co-hosts, so Nuria Piston from the University of Granada, Agnes Vari and Flavio Affinito from the McGill University, right in Canada. Just as curiosity, I'm based in Portugal. Nuria is based in Spain, I think. She's always moving. And Flavio and Agnes is currently in Montreal, Canada. So this webinar has been organized as part of the strategic plan of GEO BON, and specifically from the Ecosystem Services working group, which aims to contribute and support a global monitoring of essential ecosystem services variables and all those dimensions that come with ecosystem services and biodiversity. And it's almost not necessary to say this, but we live in a currently fast world where fast changes in human activities have consequences on nature. And for sure, it's not because of a lack of evidence that we are witnessing a decline in the ecosystem services that are provided by natural ecosystems. And this brings implications for supply chains, business operations, policy decision-making, our daily living, basically. And we have organized this webinar as well around this paradigm of nature positive or a nature positive economy, because although it's not new that we rely on nature and our economy and our decision making, our livelihoods, our well-being relies on nature, but in fact this concept is also gaining much attention and much traction, especially as we begin to understand not only that we impact on nature, but we depend on nature. And there is this wishing of going beyond being neutral or doing no harm to nature, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. And so we have challenged here three different people with three different backgrounds and perspectives on what this paradigm of nature positive is and how it connects with the valuation of natural capital, with the understanding of biodiversity, with the measurement and management of ecosystem services. And so we have here Catherine von Stackelberg. We have here Marta Santamaria and Mafalda Evangelista. Catherine, she's a research associate, but also teaches at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in the USA, and it's also affiliated to NEK Associates. And she's an expert on tools and methods to support sustainable approaches, mostly at the interface between policy and science. She's also a member of the Scientific Advisors on Risk Assessment for the European Commission in Brussels. We also have here with us Marta Santamaria. She's the director and founder of Integrating Capitals, based in Spain. She has over 2 decades of experience in addressing the value of nature, people, and society in decision making. She has been associated as senior director at the Capitals Coalition and has been the advisor of many wide organizations, including the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, Science-Based Targets, Value Accounting Network, and many more. And then we have here Mafalda Evangelista. She is a Natural Capital Director, affiliate to NBI, Natural Business Intelligence, based in Portugal. And she has been coordinating and developing for long different projects and advisors as related to natural capital credit mechanisms nature positive strategies for different economic sectors, also to interface with the academic system and the business system, and the integration of biodiversity ecosystem services into ESG and other strategies. So Catherine will start with an introduction and an overview on these different concepts, and then we will move on how to embed the concept of nature in decision making. And then Mafalda will give us some examples of specific case studies and the connection with some standards. So following this, Catherine, the stage is yours. After these presentations, we invite everyone to place their questions in the Q&A, and we will be thrilled to answer those questions or to comment on specific topics that are presented today. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Catherine.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and talk about ecosystem services, biodiversity, and the nature positive journey, which those of us or those of you who attended COP15 and COP28, we really started to see that kind of language with the nature positive pavilion and other kinds of efforts like that. We saw a lot of corporates attending these COPs that we hadn't really seen necessarily previously. And of course, lots of activity around specifically business disclosure and efforts like TNFD, SBTI, GRI, ISSB, et cetera, the sort of alphabet soup on how to implement disclosures by identifying dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities. Now, of course, COP15 focused on biodiversity. So there's lots of talk about metrics and how do we measure that, and it's different from carbon because we don't have one kind of thing. But nonetheless, these 23 targets were established, ambitious targets. I would just point out that the biodiversity COP really goes back to the early 90s. And at that time, there was a strategic plan with no targets met by 2002. Then in 2010, we established the Aichi targets, which was the strategic plan for 2011 to 2020. Again, none of those targets were met. But here we are, COP15, 2022, 23 targets, very ambitious, and hopefully we will meet some of those going forward. 196 countries were signatories. I should point out that the United States was not one of them, one of only 2 countries that didn't actually sign it. So that's where we really started to see the beginning of nature positive, and people actually called this the Paris moment, right, for biodiversity. Just a little note of caution there. Here is the actual Paris moment. And what happened there with respect to carbon is we actually haven't really seen any kind of improvement in atmospheric carbon, which is, perhaps not a good omen given how emissions went after COP21. The other thing that happened at COP15 is there were calls for make it mandatory, not reductions. The thing that was made mandatory is disclosure, right? Which then leads to the idea of biodiversity markets and things like that. Again, little note of caution because we do have some evidence from the carbon markets that maybe this is not quite as simple, and that the very system that created the issues that we have now may not be the best system for actually taking us out of this. Now, nature positive, while there's lots of conversation around it, it isn't really explicitly defined. The definitions would tend to be a little bit more aspirational rather than functional or operational, sort of like sustainability of what to whom, you sort of have to ask. But in any event, halt and reverse nature loss. By 2030, we have a 2020 baseline. So that was established. And then we have full recovery, whatever that means, by 2050. And here are some other definitions, mostly that come out of the naturepositive.org entity that you can go see. From the Global Biodiversity Framework itself, one thing that's interesting is this is under the target for indigenous peoples, is a mention of ensuring the non-commodification of environmental functions. So that's kind of interesting because that takes us right to nature positive and ecosystem services. Now, one thing about nature positive I always say is you can actually see it. We talk a lot about how hard it is to develop metrics and 1% uplift and all of these things, but you can see nature positive. You can look outside, and we would all agree that the left-hand side is not nature positive. That's nature degradation, pollution, etc. The right-hand side, much more nature positive. Even if it's in a fairly cultivated landscape like this, you can see healthy, thriving, growing nature, right? And what does that actually require? You can't have birds and mammals and all the things that we like to measure in terms of biodiversity without habitats. And in terrestrial ecosystems, you can't have habitat without soil. And you can't have soil without diversity in microbial communities, without diversity in fungal communities and detrital food webs. So we actually need biodiversity across all scales. And nature positive, though, is something that you can actually see. So it shouldn't actually be that difficult. Now, some research there's quite an extensive research. Here are two citations that will take you a lot further, is that we have to be clear when we say nature positive, whether we're talking about relative or absolute outcomes. And so this comes out of this Marone paper down here from Nature Sustainability, that if we take 2020 as a baseline and we say relative no net loss, understand that that means there can still be loss. There's no net loss from your baseline. Relative net gain, you're going in the right direction, but you're still not in an absolute sense necessarily achieving net gain. So nature positive, if you want to really make an operational definition, you have to think about absolute net gain. So that implies significant additional either conservation, and I worry about 30 by 30 because that again implies if we just conserve 30% of the planet, and we can keep doing whatever it is we're doing with the remainder, which is actually really not true. The other thing is that you have to be very careful about credits and offsets. Credit is really probably the same as an offset, and either offset or credit is actually not going to lead to an absolute net gain, right? So we need to think about that. So the other issue here is that the 2020 baseline, it really matters where you put that baseline, right? Here's the Global Living Planet Index. It doesn't even go to 2020 yet. That'll probably be in the next report. This is the last report. But so we can see a 69% decline in terrestrial, 83% in freshwater using a 1970 baseline. But there are a couple other baselines you could use, right? Start of the use of fossil fuels, Industrial Revolution, or 1945-ish, which is where we introduced GDP for the first time, and also started really emphasizing big ag, factory farming, et cetera, right? Where we really started that growth phase on that. So it really depends where you put that baseline is another thing. In the meantime, the reason we're all here, of course, is because we cannot continue to have our economic system specifically. When we talk about human activity, what are we really talking about? We're talking about our economic system, right? We make stuff, we take stuff from nature, we combine that with technology and other forms of capital, we generate things, goods and services, and then we go out and buy those, and we generate waste at every step of the way. And what we've discovered now, of course, is that we are exceeding the biophysical ability of the planet to provide those resources, not just for us, ecological overshoot, but for future generations. 2009, the idea of planetary boundaries first introduced. We had 3 at that time. By 2015, 4, 2023, 6. And now actually ocean acidification is literally right on the brink. It's probably, that planetary boundary is probably being exceeded right now. So where does that take us? Okay, well, that actually brings us to ecosystem services, right? Ecosystem services, the benefits provided by nature to people. So ecosystems generate services, services have benefits, and benefits have value. And once you start to introduce that term value, then you can get to when value is not the same as price, right? But economists like to talk about trade-offs. So once you talk about value, then you can actually get into price and other kinds of things. Now, we're really good at doing that for provisioning services, food, fiber, fuel, water, all of the things that we can sort of really measure. And there are market-based mechanisms for establishing value or price for those. We also have a lot of methods, non-market methods. We're not going to get into those for actually establishing some kind of value for all these non-market attributes, right? Which in many cases will be a large portion of the value or trade-off price for these non-market commodities from nature. Now, I just point out the most recent Dasgupta paper. So everyone knows the Dasgupta review. That was big news because it was the first time that a sort of traditional economist, if you will, argued for the use and the nature positive idea that we are exceeding biophysical boundaries of the planet to provide these goods. And so in this latest paper from Dasgupta, which came out last year, almost a year, well, 6 months ago, whatever, that, and he'd already introduced the idea of inclusive wealth and that we need to be measuring natural capital, et cetera. But he makes a specific argument in this paper that while many ecosystem service assessments rely on final ecosystem goods and services, which tend to be more in the provisioning direction, his argument is that we really need to think about supporting maintenance and regulating services, all those things that are required for nature positive, all those things that we need to have that healthy, thriving nature. So one idea, and this was the idea behind an effort that I'm involved in with an international group of people, this idea that in principle, we ought to be able to do this, right? We have the technology. GeoBon is probably at the forefront of that global Earth observation network, right? Between remote sensing, Earth observation, LIDAR, Sentinel, all these different data streams coming in, combined with in situ measurements, combined with machine learning predictive models, et cetera, you ought to be able to actually generate a digital twin of the planet at the pixel level. And there's a little bit of differences in resolution, especially when it gets to specific biodiversity metrics. But in principle, right, you ought to be able to do that. And we ought to all be able to agree on that. Now, we won't, because everyone has an individual profit maximization goal, right? And so there's competition here and individual consultants, everybody's doing their own metrics and developing their own tools and all that kind of thing. But in principle, we ought to be able to do this, to actually agree on that. So you could have these different data layers. You take your polygon, whatever that is, your company, the individual person, which is actually where Single Earth is kind of focused, individual landowners, private landowners, and you ought to be able to combine these layers and generate let's say an ecosystem integrity index. That's what we just published on. UN has one. There are other kinds of things out there, but something that actually captures nature positive. Again, it's not that hard to see, and we have lots of data streams. And then you integrate, and you can actually develop what is essentially a nature-backed currency. And we talk a lot about putting nature on the balance sheet, but we don't really talk about how to put it on the income statement. So when we invest in nature, where is that profit maximization piece? That's still the piece that's missing, and that's the piece that actually drove the degradation that we're seeing now. So how are we going to get past that? How are investors and companies, all of those entities that are looking to get a return on their investment? Nature positive is sort of not enough. You've still got to get a return. So how do you actually do that? One idea is something like a nature-backed currency. Something else that's going on is, you can see this here, can you change the future.org, is the ecological benefits framework. This is a large effort with hundreds of people across the spectrum, Web3, refi, scientists, policymakers, all kinds of people involved in developing a common ontology that we can use, that essentially is this digital handshake where we can actually identify positive impacts in the sense of MRVs, right? Monitoring, reporting, verification, that we can actually agree on a set of those because we all have the same common goal. Now, where does GeoBon come in? For example, and GeoBon, we're not going to be able to agree on this digital twin, even though we should, but entities like GeoBon, of which we are all probably a part, that is a community of practice. And the whole idea is to be able to share observation, share tools, share resources for this common goal. And here's just an example. This is the BON, and it's a web shot from the BON in a box, where we can actually agree on essential biodiversity variables and things like that, and then implement those to support better kinds of decision making. So we don't have a lot of time. Really look forward to discussions. Thank you for your attention. And now we are going to see some positive examples, I think, of implementing this idea of nature positive and ecosystem services. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I believe one of the key words that you mentioned throughout was agreement. And that is a topic for a great discussion. We can then involve, we will have now Marta. Well, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and thanks for the invite to you and to GEO BON. So I'm really grateful to be here with all this group to discuss about these topics and how to progress in the journey to be nature positive. So I'm going to focus, as it was introduced by Sophia, on how to embed nature into decisions to help in this journey to become nature positive. So let me see if this, yes, progress. So in the next 10 minutes, I want to run you through this logic of Catherine introduced us and said very well the scene. And I would like to also start understanding that we need to progress towards a solution. We cannot keep in this situation, and we have to start thinking on solutions. So one of the first things is to start understanding our relationships with nature to help us to embed nature into our decisions and change the path in which we have been going. So entering into the first block, as Catherine mentioned, the sculpture review, probably most of you are aware of it. So Catherine has been illustrating us the planet on the left, no? The planet in which our ecological footprint is over the biosphere capacity of regeneration. But we have to, as I mentioned, to start thinking that sustainability and nature positive is possible, but we need to change what we are doing. We need to start regenerating, and we need to start reducing our demand of nature. So as the sculptor review was saying, we need full change of how we think, how we act, and how we measure success. And we need a full system change. So there are many key actors that are represented here. As you can see in this infinity loop in blue, the capitalist coalition is representing the business, that all the actions of business are connected with finance because finance allocate resources to businesses. And also governments have an important role because they set the rules and incentives that influence the businesses. And that's how the system is working. So the nature positive initiative that Catherine mentioned, that was kind of setting the vision of revert the degradation of nature and start recovering, they wanted to make it actionable. So the key high-level actions to become nature positive are the ones that are within each of these colors. So it's clear that we need to start understanding our relationship with nature, how we impact and how we depend on nature. This information will help us to commit, to set targets, to set a higher ambition to regenerate nature. These targets have to be embedded, and we have to start transforming how we act and how companies, organizations, finance, and governments are moving into action and changing their strategies. And finally, the disclosure piece that also, Catherine, I think that you mentioned it, the disclosure is not going to change everything. So it's the end. So the disclosure is going to help a flow of information across stakeholders, but it's true that it's not going to make the change of everything. So where to start? So I wanted to bring you something practical and something that organizations can start doing right now, and is applying the Natural Capital Protocol. This protocol was developed by the Capitalist Coalition and is a decision-making framework to help organizations identify, measure, and value their impacts and dependencies. So to start with this first step of assessing, and especially assessing what businesses are doing, the Natural Capital Protocol is structured in a very pragmatical way. It's a step-by-step approach, responding basically to 4 questions. The first question is why natural capital is important to organizations, then scoping, identifying which are the most relevant impacts and dependencies, then trying to measure and value, so it's understanding the importance of those impacts and dependencies, and finally, what next? So moving into action is really a framework that wants to change the way in which organizations are taking decisions. I'm going to run you very quickly through and giving a bit of flavor of each of these steps to show that it's really actionable and the logic that it's behind connecting with all the approaches of ecosystem services and valuation. So the Natural Capital Protocol start showing to the organizations, mainly to businesses, that nature is an asset. It's something that is a stock of renewable and non-renewable resources that combine to yield a flow of benefits to people. So it's bringing our attention to the importance of caring and regenerating the stock of and the state of nature, because as Catherine was saying, because we are benefiting from it. So if the nature is degraded, we are experiencing losses. So it's really like any other asset that companies understand they need to care of it. So that is the analogy of bringing the concept of natural capital to businesses. So it's really important that organizations understand how they interact with this, with the natural capital. And this is coming through the impact. So it's really understanding the outflows from the businesses, putting the business in the center, understanding which are the outflows towards nature. So for example, which is the level of pollution or the water the water discharges and how they are affecting nature. But it's also important to understand that the organizations depend on nature. So are all those flows, those ecosystem services that we are referring to, are really important for businesses. And they are important because both the impacts and the dependencies could create some risk and opportunities that will affect businesses. And that's why they need the information, they need to assess them and understand them and value them to take better decisions and manage their impacts and dependencies to avoid having risk and to benefit from the opportunities. There is a growing evidence that the risk and opportunities coming from natural capital are affecting companies. So the good news is that natural and nature stop being something nice to have or nice to look at, but is becoming something strategic, and companies need frameworks and resources and tools to start understanding and managing the relationship with nature. So the Natural Capital Protocol, once is understood the importance of natural capital, is inviting organizations to do a proper scoping approach to identify which are the key impacts and the key dependencies, and understand why they are material, and being comprehensive, trying to cover everything and trying to understand what is happening across the value chain. So just the operations is not relevant. You need to understand what is happening upstream and also downstream, because all those risks and opportunities upstream and downstream could affect you as a business. So the next stage of the Natural Capital Protocol is invited to measure and value these impacts and dependencies to understand the value and the relative importance of the cost and benefits, both for the society and for the business. And this is done going through the pathway approach. In the left-hand side, you can see an impact pathway that is showing how the organizations are having those outflows, those impact drivers that I mentioned before, for example, pollution. And what the protocol is encouraging is to go beyond and understand which are the consequences from those impact drivers into changing the quality of nature, and how that change in the quality of nature is affecting and is impacting on people. And we can put values on the changes on the welfare of people. That information is relevant because there are some transition risks that will happen because they are triggered because of the value of the impact on the life of people. So for example, governments could be changing the regulation, or investors could be deciding not to allocate resources, or consumers could be deciding to change their preferences because they are asking companies to avoid impacts on people. On the right-hand side, you can see a dependency pathway that basically is saying companies depend on those ecosystem services. So we need to think in how the stock of nature is evolving. And as we know, the nature is degrading, and that is going to have some consequences on that dependency of businesses on nature, on those ecosystem services. So it's trying to put value, to give visibility inside the businesses on the importance of regenerating and caring of the stock of nature. So finally, all this information has to help us to embed nature into our decisions. So the last part of the Natural Capital Protocol is really moving into action. The color green is like the color of the hope, no? So we still have hope. We can change things. As I mentioned, all the organizations that were working on the Nature Positive initiative they were highlighting all the high-level actions. So what is done through the application of the Natural Capital Protocol is the assess, that is understanding the impacts and dependencies and the relative importance. But that is just one piece of the puzzle. That information have to help to transform business strategies, to commit to set targets, to set a high ambition for organizations and businesses to be nature positive. And finally, that information can be disclosed. So the disclosure is the last bit to inform the rest of the stakeholders in the system. So organizations are already doing this. This is a journey, as we have been saying. I brought here the maturity map developed by Accountancy for Sustainability. So you can see that companies could be doing, it's progressing. So they can be at the beginning level, at intermediate level, or finally into a leading stage if they are integrating natural capital into their decision-making and how they assess, commit, transform, and disclose information. So there are organizations and businesses that are already applying these approaches and trying to understand the relationship, committing, transforming, and disclosing. So you can find many examples in the website of the Capitals Coalition. There is a report in which it's trying to collect a variety of examples across the world. So this is something that is not just done in Europe or in certain regions. So different companies are realizing about the importance of nature, are starting, as you can see here, to the assess, the A is assess, the C is commit, the T is transform, and then disclose. And there are connections with what finance is doing and what governments is doing. So yes, we have to be positive, and Mafalda is going to illustrate us and land all these approaches into specific and real cases and connect this with other frameworks more with the commitment, with the transforming, and with the disclosure. So I hand over to you, Mafalda. Thanks for your attention and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Marta. Exactly, the flow from the Natural Capital Protocol, it seems easy when we see the scheme, right? Because it touches the different dimensions, and then when it gets to actually being implemented, it starts to become more challenging, because as we imagine, it's not just a matter of agreement, as Catherine was highlighting, but agreement on how we measure, agreement on how we understand, agreement on how we value, because we are all different, from different backgrounds, from different sectors, from different experiences, and how to combine this with an agreement of reporting and also disclosure to avoid, I'm going to say this already because we can discuss it later, the greenwashing and the greenwashing as well associated. Well, Mafalda, thank you. Yeah. There you go.
Thanks a lot, Sophia. Good afternoon to all, to Marta and to Catherine as well. Thank you to GEO BON for inviting, for giving me this opportunity, and as well to Sophia for inviting me to be here today. So jumping into the slides, as Sophia presented, I work for NBI. But moving forward, we are a business and ecology consultancy company. We work pretty much in these areas, but what we really like is to do it in the field. But nowadays we feel a lot that the companies that look for us for some help need to deal between this challenge that Sophia and Marta were talking about now, of linking these frameworks and these requirements to the field, to the action that is needed to reach this global goal. This is a very macro goal, but needs to happen. So here in the being a global goal, we have different responsibilities. We have responsibilities as well for national and local governments, but also for companies and financial institutions. From the side of national and local governments, we need to adopt and implement plans across different scales, supported by enabling regulations, so that the other economical agents, the other parts of society also can do it in a way that we know that we are going to have and to reach a good impact on nature and to reach that goal. So companies and financial institutions needs or are being asked to assess their own impacts, their dependencies, their risks, their opportunities. They are being asked to shift their organizational models, their strategy models, their business models. They need now to commit with science-based targets for nature. They are being asked to report and to give information on to their investors and to their stakeholders regarding the way they are relationing with nature, the way they are using the natural resources, and the way they are putting the products and the services that we all consume. So they are being asked as well to be transformational agents and as well to advocate with governments for more policy ambition so that they can do what they need to do regarding this global goal, this global societal goal. This nature positive goal, it's quite close to and quite aligned with the new global biodiversity framework, as Catherine referred. But I wanted to highlight that this requires a quite ambitious transformational change. It's needed. Companies need to do a lot. Of course, we know that larger companies are already working. Some of them are already engaging with their suppliers. They are already asking to SMEs to also give information on what they are relating with nature. But of course, we need governments and the financial markets as well to be enablers and the drivers of change in this process as well. I wanted here to highlight that, and we feel a lot that with our relation with companies, is that an individual company cannot claim itself to be nature positive. Companies can act to contribute to the global goal, to this global goal with actions, with systematically abating their own impacts and promoting the positive impacts in order to have a positive gain to nature. But they cannot claim itself to be solely nature positive. So we have, regarding all these and around this global goal, and pretty much around since 2020, around the COP15, we have seen the growth of a new context for biodiversity and for ecosystems. We have seen a rise in the rise of biodiversity in the corporate sustainability agenda. And since the 2020, some reports and some policies have been published, and as well some voluntary standards that are a great support for companies that need to fulfill with all the reporting requirements that they need to fulfill, and very good. But of course, it is quite challenging, especially when the value chains are so large in the larger companies. So it's quite difficult to reach and to reach all the hotspots or the hotspots of biodiversity in a value chain. So these frameworks are a great help to define priorities, to define, to identify what are the material issues, what are the material impacts, the material opportunities as well. So they are quite relevant and give good orientation for companies. Of course, since 2020, these all frameworks are multiplying. These here are some examples from Business for Nature and WBCSD. Last year, some roadmaps to nature positive were also launched. Sometimes these frameworks are a bit macro, but they are good in a way that they are pretty much aligned with the previous ones that have been developing, like the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, the Science-Based Targets for Nature, that are, I think, and the GRI as well for reporting. I think they are probably the major ones, the most relevant and the most supportive for this process. One common recommendation of these frameworks that I can highlight is that they all recommend to align actions across the value chain with the mitigation hierarchy. So start to avoid any impacts, reduce impacts, and then restore and regenerate, and apply this approach to every part of the value chain in a cross-cut way. So with all this context, corporate commitments to nature from companies are increasing. Since last year, of course, carbon commitments are still in the forefront, but the companies, larger companies, smaller companies are much more mature in their relation with climate issues than with nature. We see that the companies that mostly rely on nature are the ones that are in the forefront on this journey, on this nature journey. But we see that since the last year, 2022 to 2023, we have here an increase and more companies are committing with biodiversity. In the beginning of January 2024, the TNFD disclosed that already have 320 companies as early adopters. This is a very good news. They are accepting more, so this is quite good. It is a great opportunity for companies to start in this process. And what we advise, knowing what we advise for every company, smaller, bigger, is that they should, with all the requirements that they need to fulfill and disclose, we advise all the companies to start right now with this process, not only for this processual and bureaucratic process, but because it's really urgent. That is the first issue. And then they will be asked to report on all these topics and what's their response regarding their actions. Just to highlight here the approach on TNFD, the LEAP approach that starts with the location of the interface with nature, then the evaluation of dependencies and impacts, and then the assessment of risks and opportunity, and then all the preparation to respond with actions regarding the priorities, what is material, and respond also reporting. Here I really like this image because our work is our foundation, our work base are nature-based solutions, and we strongly believe that nature-based solutions in the end will result in more opportunities than the investment, sometimes in the short term, but for sure in the medium and long term. but sometimes also in the short term. And nature-based solutions can be applied in different environments, since mountains, forests, rivers, wetlands, farmlands, in cities, as I will show you right after, and in coastland areas as well. So I will give you some examples. I don't want to miss my time. I will give you some examples here on ecosystems, on natural capital strategies, also in agroecology and forestry, and also in some projects of promoting biodiversity as well in cities, in municipalities. That is the example of a nature positive strategy that we have developed for a linear infrastructure sector company in Portugal, working in the highways management sector. We have developed a strategy and an action plan. Currently, that process is closed, and now they are starting to implement the management plan in pilot areas, so that they can then scale up for these for all these 1,500 kilometers. So here some of the measures that they will start to implement. Vegetation management here, regarding the risks we have here in Portugal in these areas. These highways are all across the country, so we have problems, issues. There are risks with forest fires and invasive species. They need to control it and perform habitat restoration, so that they can use that approach to control these risks. Promote landscape diversity, management of ecosystem services, mainly water, soil, carbon, and ensure the connectivity management, and also have zero of fauna mortality as well. These are some of the resultant indicators, only few aligned with all the indicators for reporting that are in line with the TNFD and the ESRS of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive from the European Commission. We also set a biodiversity ranking, a KPI, a biodiversity KPI, that links action with the indicators that need to be reported. Action with the targets until 2028, and then the strategy needs to be revised with more ambition. On agroecology and forestry, I bring here an example of an asset of an investment fund. This is located in Alentejo region, a very dry area, and the project goal here is to develop an agroecology strategy, combining the regenerative agriculture with biodiversity and ecosystem services enhancement. Here we have privileged 5 management measures: cover crops, hedgerows, water streams were also restored. We also have here some habitats restoration and some interventions regarding erosion control and biodiversity and habitats recovering. Just wanted to say as well that this project, these areas, these actions were implemented in the context of a project, the project BONEX, in which NBI participate. That was financed by PRIMA program from the European Commission, and this project is focused in water, energy, food, environment nexus. But this is a pilot test. It's a pilot in this area, and the goal is also to be scaled up to other natural assets of the investment fund. Here also some indicators that they will be able to report and to monitor. We assessed the average agroecological value, and the goal is to improve that ecological value. Some examples as well in the link between making the link between cities and biodiversity and territory as well. Here we have a municipality. I only brought municipalities in the north of Portugal. I should have brought one in the south, but it was a coincidence. Here we wanted to create a strategy to promote the collaboration between public and private entities, and the goal was to develop practical nature positive actions and measures for the management of natural spaces in urban areas. Here it was an area with very much degraded areas. It was the focus was an industrial area. So here's some of the indicators, and here's one of the examples that the restoration plan includes in one of the road infrastructures that is part of that area. So the goal here is to have a nature positive area, a nature positive landscape, like Catherine showed in her first slide. This is another municipality here, and the goal here was to develop a strategy, identify the values, set the baseline, and set a management plan for the municipality. Some of the general management measures were wetland restoration, coastline habitat restoration. It was quite diverse, that municipality, pretty close to the sea. So, but as well the promotion of natural regeneration of natives, the creation of a nursery for native species as well, the control of invasive species, promoting the green urban areas, the construction of shelters for wildlife, and the restoration for pollinators as well. So here's some of the indicators also, and in this project it was possible to identify a great number of opportunities for restoring natural capital in coastal areas, wetlands, woodlands, streamside galleries. It has we have identified a huge potential in this area. So thanks a lot. And now I'm here for any question.
Thank you, Mafalda. It was good to see real examples of how this huge acronyms and different initiatives, different concepts, different standards, it almost sounds like too much, right? TNFD, CSRD, and then strange concepts beyond ecosystem services and biodiversity, is natural capital, and then all the terminologies and all the standards, different standards for different sectors can be combined, and also on the types of the different indicators, as we were here mentioning. Even within GEO BON, we have such different views on which indicators are actually core indicators, essential indicators for informing on ecosystems and on nature and on biodiversity, and this multiplies towards the globe. I would suggest here that we address two questions that we have in the Q&A as we approach. The first one is from Mayra, and if Mayra is still here with us, and it's addressed to Marta. So its assessment should not then start with biophysical trends of what is before moving on to dependencies. Not sure if Mayra is here to place the question. But either way, Marta, if you
I'm
wanted
here
to,
if there
yeah.
is the for clarification. Well, it was hard to type because I am on the browser. But basically, it's I saw that there was a link between dependencies and action, but then to assess these dependencies, shouldn't you establish like a baseline of what nature is able to offer, seeing trends and let's say natural capital accounts before moving on to these dependencies? Basically, that's what it's the question about. Thank you.
Yes, Maya, so totally agree. So basically, the dependencies at the beginning is to understand how organizations depend on nature and have those inflows. And immediately after, the first thing is what you are saying is like understand which is the state, and that is in biophysical, you have to measure it in biophysical units. And when I was showing the dependency pathway, it was a company depending on pollination services, and the population of these were decreasing. So that was the aim of saying we need to understand the trend, how the biophysical components of, in this case, it would be the size of the population of bees is decreasing. So yeah, definitely the biophysical information is underpinning any assessment. And the trends is really what is giving us the understanding of the consequences in the long run and why companies need to react and why it's important to really invest in enhancing those assets to avoid that trend that is expected to happen, that we can revert it. So yeah, fully agree if it was not clear. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Marta, for addressing this. If Catherine or Mafalda want to do any quick comment on this before we move to the next question.
I would just add again, so you look at pollinators. What do you need to have pollinators? You need things to pollinate. What do you need to have things to pollinate? Healthy soil. Again, nature, you can see it. You can't focus. I mean, I would argue you can't really focus on the pollinators. You have to focus on how the pollinators are actually healthy and thriving, which is a healthy, thriving ecosystem, which is nature positive, and you can see that. And so it really does come back to soil, I think, and what is actually happening in that landscape, right? You're not going to artificially create pollinators out of nothing. But it's important to track that. And this was my point about the baselines, right? If you take 2020 as a baseline versus if you go back, there probably were many more pollinators altogether even before that. But you have to start somewhere, and probably any effort is going to be better than nothing.
Thank you, Catherine. Indeed, I was here. I have also a geological background. So I'm wondering if we take the geological baseline, then nothing alone of this matters. It's just a joke. Catherine, since you're here, a question for you from Ken Backstad. You mentioned many times the need for collaboration and the shared ontology of our worldview. How would you suggest we do this, both as individuals and as a community, keeping in mind that GEO BON is just one of several communities working on this space? If Ken is here,
yeah.
of course, we invite him as well to jump in.
Okay, well, I love this question because this is the need for collaboration, but actually what I said was in principle, we ought to all be able to, because we all have the same kinds of data streams, and in principle, we should be able to agree, and we should be able to have this shared ontology. But what is required for that to actually happen? Systemic transformation. Because right now we have individual companies and entities, and so we're all working in this space, right? But guess what? Everybody needs to make a profit. Your company needs to make a profit. Everybody needs to make a profit. Maybe not governments, but even governments, right? Is that monetized piece. And so as long as you have profit maximization as your goal like that, then you don't have the incentive. Companies are now figuring out, how do we profit from this new nature positive idea? And so just mapping dependencies and impacts and things like that, it's really not going to do anything, right? You're still taking from nature. You're still making widgets. We're still trying to fit nature into our economic system. And meanwhile, really, we should be making our economic system more like nature. We could do that. We all agreed on that in the first place. It's actually fairly new. But do we have the appetite for that? So my actual answer to that is governments have to send a signal to central banks. Central banks have to send a signal to investors, companies, et cetera, et cetera. And if you say, oh, we have mandatory disclosure, which we don't have, but maybe we're moving toward that. What if you said, it's not just mandatory disclosure, it's mandatory data. So many companies are collecting data right now, and that's all proprietary, right? They're not sharing the data pretty much, or maybe you could buy it. You can probably buy it. You can get on various platforms, CDP, others, whatever. You can actually buy the data, but you can't really access it. So what if you said, it's not just mandatory disclosure, it's mandatory sharing of data through GeoBon, through an integrated portal, et cetera. I think you need systemic transformation would be my argument. Interested to hear what others think.
Yeah. Ken, I saw you raising your hand for a moment. Do you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to ask if that meant that you would have to rely on governments, and you answered that in the second part of your answer. So that does make sense. Thanks.
Well, I heard at COP15 there was an IMF economist, and I was ready to, sort of dislike him intensely. I was like, oh, I'm going to get ready to ask my questions and do whatever. And he stood up and actually gave this very reasonable thing. He was like, look, this is pretty simple. You just have governments send the signal to central banks send the signal out, and then boom, 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 it all starts to fall in place. But as long as you have monetized profit, we can talk about investing in nature. What does that really mean? It's not enough to say, oh, we've improved the coastline and so forth. Like, who cares, right? I need my monetized profit. Okay, so let's say your profit depends on how nature positive you are. It's kind of the idea of the nature-backed currency. That may be something, I don't know, but how are you going to do it within this current system? I just don't know.
If you don't mind a quick follow-up, what about as individuals, as researchers, how do we help move toward the sorts of shared standards that governments could then adopt and push central banks toward using? I understand it's a big problem, but what could we do now, individually and collectively?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this kind of effort that we're doing now, right? Like GeoBon. GeoBon is a good example. There are some other smaller kind of GBIF is positioning itself to have sort of biodiversity data. Again, I don't think biodiversity in and of itself is enough, because in order to have those species, you got to have the habitats in order to. So we think about ecosystem integrity as this larger consolidated kind of metric that, again, you could monitor at the pixel level. But so as individuals, I think we just have to keep pushing and pushing, right? Keep publishing, doing the things, making the changes at the individual level. But it can't be just bottom up, can't be just top down. We all have to kind of agree. But the big place where we have to agree, I think, is this monetized crowd. So ecosystem services tries to do that by actually assigning price or maybe even value, right? You assign a value. That's how we say, oh, $4 trillion worth of benefits to coastlines, et cetera, that don't actually translate into monetized profit is the problem. But if you could bring those worlds together, just one last thing is I would say the problem that I have with ecosystem services is it, again, widgetizes nature and puts us as separate. There are indigenous people, and if you went to COP15, there's two kinds of people, consumers and indigenous people. Indigenous people are going to save us after we've been, let's be honest, colonizing and being horrible to indigenous people for a long history. Now, suddenly, indigenous people are going to save us so the rest of us can keep consuming, and we are called consumers. That's what we are. That's what we do. That whole thing has to shift, right? That whole thing has to shift in order to really become nature positive and to really integrate with nature. You can do this. Agricultural systems don't have to do monoculture. We know ecological
Thank you, Catherine. Just moving on
right?
to the next one. And just also to highlight here that the world is not just Europe and the USA. It's much more than Europe and USA. Sorry for this short jumping
right. Indigenous people are going to
this.
Yeah.
And I will move to another question, which is kind of a hot topic, and I would give it firstly here to Mafalda, and then let Marta and Catherine also approach this. So there we go.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
think about the claim of nature positive for a company? Is it not similar to carbon neutral, which is being banned in Europe? And how can companies become nature positive if not pursuing biodiversity offsetting, which is not generally seen as acceptable?
It's quite. I think nature positive. If thought as being a balance between positive impacts and negative impacts, it's much more challenging than carbon neutral. I think so. It will be much more challenging for companies. But I think, as I told in my presentation, that companies and or big organizations claim that clearly companies cannot claim itself to be nature positive. They need to, of course, they can compensate their activities, their inevitable impacts, but they will have all the value chains, all the companies that are linked to them. And this needs to be an effort in a chain. So the being nature positive is having a nature positive approach in their businesses in a cross-cut way. So it's like a way of being, a state of being, integrating all these approaches since the governance model until the most little operation in the field. With every partners. So you need to applicate, or you need to change the process. Probably you will need to change your inputs, the way you consume energy, probably all the operations. But of course, this is a process. And I understand that is quite difficult. But for a company, it's quite relevant to identify the priorities. It's quite difficult to need to expect for the impacts, the dependencies, the opportunities, but it's quite relevant to identify where are the hotspots, the impacts hotspots, and to prioritize all the activity. And what I think is that nowadays, companies are still in quite low maturity level. If the scientists, the big organizations, the United Nations still not agree on what the IUCN, for instance, still not agree with the completely clear definition of nature positive. I think the best that we can accept is that nature positive is a state of being acting in a nature positive way, in a positive way for nature. So I think a company can't claim that will be nature positive until.
Thank you, Mafalda. It's also a very interesting perspective because you talk about companies, but actually universities, governments, do they understand that dependencies or impacts? This is just a question that, and I would pass you
but I would say,
Martin,
I'm sorry, I was talking about companies, but it can be a region that may want to claim to be nature positive.
Yes, I would agree with Mafalda that I was at the Capitals Coalition, and it was one of the organizations involved in the movement of nature positive. So I think it was, we were conscious that it was very challenging to see how to measure it, but it was a campaign to try to raise awareness and to set a level of ambition and aspiration of companies of doing it in a different way, and taking nature and considering nature and the impacts on nature to try to change things. So I think it's with Mafalda. So I agree with Mafalda on that. That is kind of how to approach it and how to be more ambitious. And the mitigation hierarchy concepts help a lot. I believe a lot on the restoration and rehabilitation. So the offsetting has the problem of going to those residual impacts. So I
Yeah.
think that we have to, as much as possible, try to avoid them, minimize them, and restore them. When it's a residual, yes, go for offsetting. But I don't think that offsetting as itself is the solution to be nature, because companies could be
It's not the solution. Yeah,
it should be the last option. Yeah, because you have to do it when nature is lost. So that is the step in which I think that now there is more consciousness to try to avoid reaching to that point of destroying nature.
You're going to very quickly have a supply and demand problem, because there's going to be a lot of demand for offset. By the way, offset credit, how are they different? They're the same thing. You're doing something and it's like, we want to do something better over here. Okay, do that. But there's going to be a supply demand problem, right? And this is 30 by 30. Maybe look to nature and maybe readjust how you're doing it. Do your agriculture differently. Don't extract, do something. We can do this. And you only have to look to nature to see the solutions. But I don't think you can do it within the paradigm we currently have.
Thank you, Catherine. You just gave a nice idea to have a roundtable in our ecosystem service working group about offset versus credits.
Yeah.
This would be the whole afternoon
I wanted
or
to answer,
the whole night, depending on the region.
I wanted to answer, but we are on time.
Exactly. We are 1 minute away from our time.
Yeah.
I just want to thank everybody for attending this webinar, and especially Catherine, Marta, Mafalda, and my co-hosts for the effort on this and launching these ideas, and those that were here with us. This webinar will be recorded and placed in the GEO BON webpage, and please feel free to contact Mafalda, Catherine, and Marta for any follow-up, and to reach out the Ecosystem Service Working Group, which is also in the strategic plan to deal with all this boom of new concepts and paradigms around the world. Thank you so much, and have a good night, day, morning, afternoon. Talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot to all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.